The Gaza Health Ministry reports that since October 7th, more than 42,709 Palestinians have been killed, including nearly 16,765 children. Updated figures also show that over 97,590 people have been injured, with 8,663 children and 6,327 women among the wounded. As the crisis escalates, thousands of Gazans remain missing under the rubble. In recent developments, Gaza's health ministry reports at least 45 Palestinians killed and 130 injured in Israeli attacks in the past 24 hours.
صاروخين على الدار وهم نايمين في منطقة ما قالوش يخلوا منها استهدفوهم وهم نايمين حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل.
قديش عمر الطفل؟
11 شهر، انولد في الحرب واستشهد في الحرب.
شو اسمه؟
اسمه حسام محمد حسام الخالد. استشهد هو وابوه وعمه. ربنا يرحمهم ان شاء الله.
وين منطقة؟
البريج. الساعة 11 مساء صار استهداف في البريج بلوك 6. صاروخين. توجهنا للمكان فطلناهم من تحت الانقاض. 5 إصابات و3 شهداء من ضمنهم هذا الطفل. العالم الظالم اللي طرق غزة تنذبح وتتدمر. أي عالم؟ العالم المجتمع العربي الإسلامي اللي قاعد بيتفرج علينا مش قادر يحرك ساكن. الجيوش عربية حوالينا 120 مليون جار حوالينا. إيش سووا لغزة؟ شو عمل لغزة؟ بس بدعوا. الدعاء ما برد ظلم. بدها تتحرك الناس. هذول ايش ذنبهم؟ إذا مش مسلمين؟ هذا مش مسلم؟ واللي استشهدوا هذول والموجودين هذول مش مسلمين؟
Israeli officials have revised the death toll from the October 7th attacks, reducing the number from 1,405 to 1,139. Meanwhile, more than 200 people were reported taken captive during the incidents. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, has announced the suspension of critical humanitarian services in the northern Gaza Strip due to intensified Israeli military operations. In a statement posted on X, the agency reported, "Intensified military operations in the north are forcing us to shut down life-saving services." The situation has escalated to the point where at least 7 schools that were providing shelter to displaced individuals are now being evacuated. UNRWA emphasized the urgent need for humanitarian aid, as only 2 out of 8 water wells in the Jabalia refugee camp remain operational, further exacerbating the dire conditions faced by residents. The cessation of these services highlights the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where access to basic necessities is increasingly limited amid ongoing violence. UNRWA continues to call for immediate action to ensure the safety and well-being of those affected by the war, urging the international community to respond to the escalating humanitarian needs. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has characterized Israel's military offensive in Lebanon as an invasion, urging the international community to take decisive action. Speaking during a parliamentary session, Sánchez asserted, "It is clear that there has been an invasion by a third country of a sovereign state such as Lebanon, and therefore the international community cannot remain indifferent."
Es evidente que está habiendo una invasión por parte de un tercer país, de un Estado soberano como es el Líbano, y por tanto la comunidad internacional no puede permanecer ajena a esa invasión. Lo hemos denunciado en Ucrania, lo hemos denunciado también en Gaza, y en este caso la invasión la estamos denunciando también en el Líbano. Yo lamento la falta de acuerdo en la Unión Europea. Lo lamento, porque creo que en estas cuestiones deberíamos ser coherentes, no con nuestra posición, una posición coherentes con la defensa del derecho internacional humanitario, y por tanto nosotros vamos a seguir trabajando en el seno de la Unión Europea para que eso sea así.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a stark warning during a recent press briefing, stating that the war in the occupied West Bank is boiling over. His comments come amid escalating tensions as Israel intensifies its offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon, while the ongoing war in Gaza further complicates the regional landscape. Guterres highlighted the alarming nature of the situation, emphasizing that attacks in Lebanon are threatening the entire region. The UN chief called for immediate action to de-escalate the violence and urged all parties involved to prioritize dialogue over aggression. The ongoing war has already resulted in significant humanitarian crises, and Guterres warned that the escalation could lead to a broader war that may destabilize the entire Middle East. He reiterated the UN's commitment to supporting peace efforts and addressing the root causes of the violence. As the situation continues to develop, the international community remains watchful, urging restraint and cooperation among nations to prevent further deterioration of peace in the region.
The situation in the occupied West Bank is boiling over. And now in Lebanon, attacks including on civilians are threatening the entire region. Following the horrific terror attacks perpetrated by Hamas on 7 October, Gaza has become ground zero to a level of human suffering that is hard to fathom. In the midst of all the upheaval, UNRWA, more than ever, is indispensable. UNRWA, more than ever, is irreplaceable. That is why I've written directly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to express profound concern about draft legislation that could prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory. What should be the first step? We are asking for a ceasefire both in Gaza and in Lebanon.
Internet giant Google is sacking workers who protest over its links with Israel. Google, which owns YouTube, is developing Project Nimbus, a joint cloud computing enterprise with Amazon worth $1.2 billion. The project has links with Israel, including Israel's military. Google workers protested with a sit-in that demanded that Google drop Project Nimbus. Google called the police, and 9 of the workers were arrested. The protesters have now been sacked. Dozens of workers have lost their jobs. Before they took action, the Googlers, as the company refers to its own employees, tried to raise the issue in internal company forums. They found their comments deleted, and the word genocide was banned in discussions in Google. When Middle East Eye reported the sackings, Google refused to comment on the story. But a company spokesman told NBC, "We have so far concluded individual investigations that resulted in the termination of employment of 28 employees and will continue to investigate and take action as needed." Reports now say that 50 Google employees have been sacked. The protests were concentrated in Google's New York and Seattle offices, but the Google workers formed a No Tech for Apartheid group to spread the action across the International Communications Corporation. Google's Vice President of Global Security, Chris Rakow, issued a threatening letter to staff saying, "If you are one of the few who are tempted to think we're going to overlook conduct that violates our policies, think again." No Tech for Apartheid said the workers had engaged in a peaceful sit-in and did not damage property or threaten other workers, and that Google had fired them indiscriminately. Google has also previously taken Israeli money to run propaganda adverts aimed against the UN Relief and Works Agency. Tim, do you think that you referred to it in a point that you made earlier about the kind of perhaps some might say naive, but or at any rate hopeful attitude that people had towards the new tech corporations, that they weren't like the old order, that they were facilitators of a horizontal method of communication. Is that kind of guilt coming off the gingerbread, do you think?
Very much so. I mean, yes, it's true. A lot of the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons came out of a kind of countercultural moment in the west coast of the United States. The sort of elements of the hippie ideology, and it is exemplified in Google's old slogan of "Do no evil." It has really over, for at least a decade, if not longer, become quite clear that they are as rapacious as big oil, as the big armaments firms, as anybody else. I don't think there's really very much now to distinguish them. We've seen how big tech perfectly cheerfully has pulled apart other sections of the economy, some of it very deliberately in the case of the conventional news media, some of it inadvertently in the case of high street shops. So yes, we've seen that they are self-centered interests who serve their shareholders or their management, and they're quite content to do that, even when it's dramatically not in the interests of the broader mass of humanity.
Southeast Asian leaders gathered for the annual ASEAN summit, with the ongoing civil war in Myanmar and rising tensions in the South China Sea expected to dominate discussions. The gathering of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations comes at a time when global powers such as China, the US and Russia are vying for influence in this strategically important region. ASEAN, comprised of 10 member states including Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam and the Philippines, has historically struggled to assert its influence, particularly on internal issues like the conflict in Myanmar. Despite these challenges, the summit continues to serve as a key platform for dialogue with regional and global powers.
45 บรรดากองประชุมสุดยอดเกี่ยวของเป็นโอกาสอันดีเพื่อทบทวนการสร้างประชาคมอาเซียนก็คือการจัดตั้งปฏิบัติวิสัยทัศน์อาเซียน 2025 และกำหนดทิศทางการร่วมมือในต่อหน้าโดยเฉพาะแม่นวิสัยทัศน์ของอาเซียน 2045 รวมทั้งการหัดแน่นการร่วมมือระหว่างอาเซียนกับภายนอกเพื่อสืบต่อสร้างประชาคมอาเซียนให้เข้มแข็งก็คือเพื่อภารกิจร่วมแห่งการส่งเสริมสันติภาพเสถียรภาพและการพัฒนาที่ยืนยงภาคพื้นของและสากลในโลก
The Myanmar crisis, which has worsened significantly since the military coup in 2021, remains a central concern. Despite agreeing to a peace plan, the Myanmar junta continues its violent campaign against pro-democracy groups, with over 6,000 people killed. The presence of a senior Myanmar diplomat at the summit, after being barred from high-level meetings since 2021, has raised concerns that ASEAN is compromising its efforts to resolve the conflict. Meanwhile, tensions in the South China Sea are another pressing issue, particularly as China continues to assert its territorial claims over almost the entire region. The summit also occurs amid heightened US-China tensions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is representing Washington at the forum, and maritime disputes in the South China Sea will be a key agenda item in his talks with ASEAN leaders. As the association's credibility is tested by both the crisis in Myanmar and maritime tensions, the summit highlights the challenges the bloc faces in navigating complex regional dynamics while balancing the competing interests of global powers.
Young Myanmar refugees facing drug addiction are taking part in a rehabilitation program in the jungles along the Thailand border. Families are sending their loved ones there in a desperate effort to break free from the cycle of addiction.
မိဘဆွေမျိုးမိန်းမသားသမီးတော့မငဲဘူးလေနော်အဲ့ဒီဆွဲလန်းမှုအရန်ကြီးခဲ့တယ်ဆိုတော့ရုပ်တရက်ကြီးအဲ့ဒီဆွဲလန်းမှုကိုဖျက်တောက်ပြီးလိုက်တဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာရလာတဲ့လွတ်လပ်မှုကဘာနဲ့မှလဲလို့မရဘူး
You've got sort of two large problems. You've got a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma, people having to have fled their homes, seen their relatives killed, and then there's an abundant supply of drugs and a sense of hopelessness. And those two things put together creates a perfect storm.
This crisis unfolds against the backdrop of Myanmar's deepening humanitarian catastrophe following the February 2021 military coup.
But what we've seen over the past 10-15 years or so is a dramatic shift of the drug economy in this part of the world, with a shift from plant-based drug, especially opium, towards synthetic drug, especially methamphetamine.
The junta's widespread abuses, including arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings, have displaced nearly 2 million people internally, with 94,000 fleeing to neighboring countries. Recent clashes on October 27th forced an additional 500,000 to flee, as many repeatedly escape air and ground assaults. The junta launched a national-wide census early this month, despite swatches of the country remaining outside of its control, as rebel groups urged people not to take part. The military, which seized power in a coup in 2021, has long pledged to hold elections when conditions permit.
Ken McCullum, the head of MI5, delivered a wide-ranging speech on Tuesday, outlining a surge in both terrorism and state-sponsored attacks, particularly from Iran and Russia, revealing a chilling escalation in efforts to destabilize Britain. He painted a disturbing picture of covert operations, online extremism, and the re-emergence of Islamist terror groups, all of which are putting unprecedented pressure on British security services. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has had far-reaching consequences, including Moscow's sustained mission to generate mayhem on British streets. McCullum's revelation that Russian intelligence services, particularly the GRU, have resorted to criminal networks for acts of arson, sabotage, and assassination is alarming. With over 750 Russian diplomats expelled from Europe since the start of the Ukraine war, Kremlin operatives have shifted tactics, employing criminal elements to sow chaos. A chilling example of this recklessness occurred in March when an arson attack on a Ukrainian business in East London was traced back to Russian-linked actors. This case, in which 7 individuals were charged, is just one of many, as Russia seeks to exploit criminal networks in the misguided hope of weakening Western resolve. McCullum recounted how a man in Coventry was jailed for life last year for designing a 3D printed drone intended to carry out attacks for ISIS in West Africa. Similarly, 2 brothers from Birmingham were imprisoned for attempting to join ISKP, Islamic State, Khorasan province in Afghanistan. Notably, McCullum highlighted a concerning trend involving younger recruits, with under-18s now making up 13% of MI5's cases, largely influenced by online extremism. His warning was blunt. Anyone accepting money from hostile states like Russia or Iran to carry out illegal acts in the UK will face the full force of Britain's security apparatus. McCullum's address serves as a stark warning to those who may be tempted to act as agents to hostile foreign states, whether motivated by ideology, greed, or coercion. Individuals who aid Russia, Iran, or any other hostile entity in carrying out illegal activities on British soil will face severe consequences.
25 MPs call for urgent reflection after report on the origins of the Windrush scandal. 25 Black, Asian and minority ethnic MPs have written to the Home Secretary stating that the framing of Britain's immigration legislation cannot be uncoupled from racism and the exclusion of people of colour. The MPs were responding to the publication last month of a previously suppressed Home Office report on the origins of the Windrush scandal, which highlighted how 3 decades of British immigration legislation between 1950 and 1981 were designed, at least in part, to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin who were permitted to live and work in the UK. A group of British lawmakers urged Home Secretary Yvette Cooper to acknowledge the links between racism and the country's immigration legislation as the government prepares to introduce new laws on border security, asylum and immigration. Written by Labour MP Clive Lewis and signed by lawmakers including Diane Abbott, Bel Ribeiro Addy and Marsha de Cordova, the letter stresses the need for urgent reflection on how current immigration narratives risk creating enabling environments for racism. The letter calls for action to prevent another Windrush scandal, referring to the 2018 debacle in which thousands of legal UK residents, many of Caribbean heritage, were wrongly classified as illegal immigrants. It also criticises the government's handling of the Windrush compensation scheme, which has faced repeated condemnation for delays in payments to those affected. The MPs demanded improvements to the scheme, stating that it represents continued failures in the government's efforts to repair the damage caused by the scandal.
In a remarkable display of resilience and innovation, Seda Ziwawi, a local farmer in the village of Gardimau, has become a beacon of hope for her community. With the support of EU funding, she spearheaded the construction of a dam that has significantly revitalized agriculture production in the area, despite facing a challenging 6-year drought. Ziwawi's efforts have transformed the landscape for smallholders in northwest Tunisia. allowing them to increase their crop yields and sustain their livelihoods. Her project amplifies the powerful impact that foreign funding, combined with dedicated local initiatives, can have in addressing the challenges posed by climate change.
كي بدت نقولوا نحن التضاريس تتبدل وبدت كل شيء والعبيد الفلاحة أيست اللي هاجر واللي شاف خدمة أخرى يعني خرج على الخط هذاك نهائي ونحل الفلاحة هذه من مخها جملة ما عادش مركز عليها خاطر ما هيش مورد ما تحلش دار ما تخلصش ماء ما تخلصش ضوء اللي ما تغطيش الاحتياجات نتاع العائلة ذيك اللي هاجر واللي ولا يخدم حكم كونه في حدود ولا يخدم الكونترا وكل واحد عبيد دخل في مجالات أخرى. به كي جت الفكرة هذه وطبقت الفكرة هذه ومولتها للمنظمة رجعت الفلاحة ورجعت تعمل في السواني ورجع الأمل من جديد ونسب الحق وكيما بدو الوالي يلزمنا نحن نواصلوا وباش يواصلوا ولادي كيما نقولوا نحن ولاد الفلاحة الآخرين يواصلوا نفس المسيرة لكن كيما نحن متجارين مع الويد وخدمنا هذايا كيما نقولوا خدمنا الخدمة ذي نتاع المعدن نجاروا في الويد ومشينا معيه يلزمنا ثاني نجاروا الوقت ونجاروا تغير المناخ هذايا ويلزمنا نتماشوا معيه وهذه نقولوا نحن هم يقولوا مجابهة الكوارث هذه نعتبرها كارثة من الكوارث ونعرف كيفاش نجابهاها ونتعاملوا معاها وما نقيسوش وماناش باش نقيسوا نحن
بدلتنا بصفة غريبة بدلتنا ولينا نوصلوا حتى نبيعوا منهم الخضرة نتاعنا نبيعوا منهم نبيعوا في الفلفل في الطماطم فقوس قراع الدنيا كلها بدلتنا ما عادش نلوج معناتها فلوس أخرى وليت نصرف منهم هم.
السد هذايا هالمشروع اللي جا هذايا عاوننا بنسبة 70% 70% ما عادش قبلنا نجهروا بالبالة ونجيبوا تراكس وبالبيوش باش نخلطوا الماء لهنا فهمتها وانت نجم يتكسر لك يتحلك في ثنية الماء وانت قاعد تستنى فيه وتحلك لأنك كنت عامله بالتراب تو الحمد لله وشنو برك العوامل الطبيعية نقص الماء ما تو رانا الحمد لله يعني بالطريقة هذه اللي نخدموا بها الله يرحم والدين والديك.
The dam, built with the determination and hard work of Zimbabwe and her fellow farmers, has become a symbol of empowerment and community resilience. As the village grapples with the realities of a changing climate, this project not only represents a practical solution but also fosters a sense of solidarity among the residents. Local farmers credit Zimbabwe's leadership and the dam's construction with improving their production capabilities, enabling them to withstand the ongoing effects of drought. Her story serves as an inspiring example of how grassroots efforts can make a difference, providing a model for other communities facing similar challenges. As Gardemau looks to the future, the success of this small farming project offers hope and a path forward, showcasing the importance of collaboration and innovation in the fight against climate change.